Here's a strange fact about Silo that almost nobody talks about. In 3 seasons, the show has never given us a single villain who understood the full plan. Not one. Every person who helped build the thing that ended the world thought they were solving a small, boring problem in front of them. That's the real subject of Episode 8, Grey Goo. Not nanotechnology. Not Per Stensen's fortune. Not the dirty bomb cover story. The real subject is how apocalypses get built by people who never see the blueprint. Today I'm breaking down exactly how this episode pulls that off, why the number 50 might be a trap the show set for its own audience, and what a real 1986 science book has to do with the ending of a TV show about a hole in the ground. Stick around, because there's a detail buried in this hour that most recaps are skipping completely, and it might be the key to the whole finale. Let's start where the episode starts. Per Stensen sits everyone down and walks through a list of ways the species could end itself. Nuclear war, a pandemic, a rogue asteroid, runaway artificial intelligence, climate collapse. It's the kind of doomsday checklist you've probably seen on a dozen podcasts, and the show knows that. It's setting up the twist before you notice you're being set up. Because Stensen doesn't actually fear the item on that list you'd expect. He fears nanotechnology, and his reasoning is the most grounded, least science fiction argument in the entire episode. A nuclear weapons program needs a nation-state behind it. It needs decades, billions of dollars, uranium enrichment facilities that satellites can photograph from orbit. A nanoweapon needs none of that. In his telling, it could be built by one determined person with the right lab equipment and a few $100s in materials. That's what actually keeps him up at night. Not the size of the threat, but the size of the guest list required to create it. Here's where the show borrows something real. The phrase Grey Goo isn't a Silo invention. It comes from engineer Eric Drexler, who coined it in his 1986 book Engines of Creation, widely credited with popularizing the modern idea of molecular nanotechnology. Drexler's thought experiment imagined self-replicating microscopic machines that could, in theory, keep copying themselves using any available raw material until there was nothing left to copy from. It became one of those ideas that escaped the lab and moved into pop culture, showing up in everything from video games to Michael Crichton novels. Silo is doing something smart here. It's taking a decades-old piece of real scientific anxiety and using it as the emotional engine for a story about underground bunkers. And Stensen doesn't just lecture about it. He proves his point in under a minute by remotely disabling the vehicle carrying Helen and Daniel, hijacking it from a distance as a demonstration. The message lands harder than any speech could. The thing he's afraid of isn't hypothetical. It's already sitting quietly inside the technology in your pocket, waiting. Once the fear is established, the episode pivots to something quieter and, honestly, more interesting. Stensen and Thurman aren't planning to hide the Silo project forever. They're planning to control how it eventually becomes public. And the person they want steering that story is Helen. Think about what's actually being offered here. Everyone else pulled into this project gets asked to build something physical. A tunnel, a machine, a pipe. Helen is being asked to build the narrative. She'd get institutional backing, real editorial power, and eventually the byline on the story that explains 50 underground silos to a public that's never heard of them. It's the single most consequential job offer in the episode, and it's also the one the show frames as the easiest to refuse. Helen says no almost immediately and walks. It's worth sitting with why that refusal matters structurally. She's the only character in the entire hour who's shown the full picture before making a decision. Not a fragment, not a rumor. The whole plan, stated plainly, with the human cost included. And she still walks away. That single choice is what turns everyone else's ignorance from an accident into a pattern worth noticing. Now here's where the episode does something I think deserves more credit than it's gotten. It reaches backward and recontextualizes the entire season premiere. Remember Charlotte's mission at the start of the season. Her squadron flies into what looks like weather, except it isn't weather. Instruments fail. Aircraft come apart. At the time, it plays like a mission that went catastrophically wrong. Episode 8 reveals it went exactly as planned, just not the plan anyone told her about. The real objective was never destroying the Iranian nanotech facility from the air. That job belonged to a separate low-yield device, moved underground through a tunnel dug from the Turkmenistan border using the same excavation technology that would eventually bore holes for every silo on the planet. Charlotte's squadron existed to draw fire. Command needed to measure how advanced the Iranian nanoweapons program actually was, and the fastest way to measure a threat is to put people in its way and watch what happens. Put that next to the entire founding philosophy of the Silo Project, which is built on the idea that the world will end because dangerous technology becomes cheap enough for anyone to use. And in the same hour, we watch a government spend an entire squadron just to take a single reading on how far a threat has progressed. The show never draws a big red arrow connecting those two ideas. It just lets them sit next to each other and trust you to notice. Then it complicates things further. Charlotte doesn't leave after learning the truth. A scent, a memory of her mother's kitchen carried through her brother Victor, pulls her back to herself just enough to say yes to becoming a drone pilot. It's framed as a warm scene, and on the surface it is. But look again. What actually happens is a woman is handed back just enough of her own mind to be capable of consenting to something. Whether that's healing or a very gentle form of recruitment is left deliberately unresolved. This is the section of the episode one think is doing the real thematic work, and it's easy to miss because none of these moments are staged like a big reveal. Daniel Keene gets flown out to see a massive tunnel boring machine at work. He's told there will be 10 of these machines, built to dig 50 holes total. Daniel, being a logistics guy to his core, does some quick mental math out loud. Hauling 10 machines across a continent and reassembling them 50 separate times is a waste of money and time. Just build 50 machines instead and leave each one exactly where it finishes. It's a throwaway comment. It costs him nothing to say and gains him nothing personally. And then the show casually confirms that this is exactly the logistic solution that gets used going forward. Daniel never learns what he contributed to. He leaves the entire project behind, walks away with Helen, and lives the rest of his life with zero knowledge that a piece of his small talk became permanent infrastructure buried under an apocalypse bunker. Now flip to Silo 18, centuries later, where a very different version of the same scene plays out. Knox tracks down Gus, and what should be a reunion turns into a confrontation, because Knox has just learned his father didn't die in a tunnel collapse. The collapse was faked. Another man's body was buried under his father's name, and the whole arrangement was essentially a purchase. Gus traded a technical drawing for a new identity and a hidden life. What did he actually draw? A distribution system. 49 silos, all needing to be connected back to Silo 1, which is an engineering nightmare if you run 49 separate lines. So Gus grouped them. 7 main lines branching out from the center, each one splitting again into a ring of 6 silos surrounding a 7th in the middle. Do the multiplication and you get 49, plus the one in the center, which gives you 50. 2 engineers, separated by centuries, arrive at the exact same number using completely different methods. Stensen says 50 out loud at a dinner table before any of this exists. Gus reverse engineers 50 from a plumbing problem in a hidden room, with no idea he's confirming anything historical at all. Neither man ever meets the other. Neither one is thinking about the apocalypse. They're both just solving the problem directly in front of them. Here's the detail that most breakdowns of this episode are glossing over completely. The show has already told us the real number of silos is 51, not 50. That correction happened earlier in the series and has never been walked back, which means there's a silo out there that doesn't fit Gus's distribution math at all. If his design really is the poison delivery system running underneath every silo, one of them may not be wired into it the same way the others are. That's not confirmed on screen, but it's sitting there unresolved, and it lines up too cleanly to be an accident that if Daniel and Gus represent people who built the trap without knowing it, Jimmy's mother is the other half of that equation. She's a person who found the trap after it was already set, with nothing but a torch and a hacksaw. Kennedy and Lucas, who the whole silo assumed had died out on the surface, make it back alive after being deliberately spared, their radio destroyed rather than their lives taken. That detail matters more than it first appears. Whatever the outside threat actually is, it isn't purely lethal by default. It cuts off communication first and lets isolation do the rest of the work. Once they're back, the story shifts to Jimmy's mother, whose remains are eventually found behind a panel welded shut from the inside. The physical evidence tells the story without a single line of dialogue. She found where a lethal substance was entering the silo through a pipe, cut into it, and burned off what escaped as fast as it leaked, essentially fighting a losing battle in real time. At some point, she clearly understood she wasn't going to seal the source in time. So she made a different choice. She sealed the room instead, with herself inside it, using her own body to help hold the barrier. It reframes everything Jimmy has believed about his family. He spent the whole series knowing his father died so he could live. Now he learns his mother didn't just protect him. She protected everyone in that silo, using nothing but tools she found on hand and no plan beyond stopping the leak, by any means available. And this is the moment that should feel like triumph, proof that the threat can be physically fought and beaten. Except the episode almost immediately complicates the win. A coded warning saves the team from walking into a trap set by Judicial, using nothing more than institutional memory of a past injustice as an improvised signal. And then geometry gets in the way. Silo 17 isn't laid out the same way as Silo 18. The panel isn't where the map suggests it should be. Gus's design tells you the pipe exists. It doesn't tell you which wall it's hiding behind. Buried in the middle of all this plot movement is a smaller scene that might be the most important character beat of the entire season. Bernard admits, without being pressured into it, that he had Judge Meadows killed. What makes this land differently than every other confession this show has given us is the complete absence of justification. Bernard has spent 3 seasons being the character who always had a reason ready, who could explain exactly why the silo required whatever terrible thing he'd just done. This time he doesn't do that. He simply states what happened, admits it made a certain kind of sense to him at the time, and then admits the result changed nothing. Order didn't hold because of what he did. It just happened to hold anyway. That's a heavier reversal than a simple change of loyalty. Changing sides is easy to write. What's harder and rarer is a character giving up the private story he's been telling himself just to survive being who he is. Bernard does that here with nothing attached to it. No bargaining, no request for forgiveness. Now, before I wrap this up, let's Steelman the opposite read, because I think it deserves a real hearing. The strongest counterargument here is that Grey Goo is simply an exposition episode. A wealthy man explains his motives across an extended dinner scene. A father explains a technical drawing to his estranged son. A murder investigation gets resolved in a hallway. Under that reading, the recurring pattern of accidental authorship I've been describing isn't a deliberate theme. It's just the natural shape a script takes when a season needs to deliver a large amount of backstory quickly. That's a fair point, and it's worth taking seriously. But here's why I don't think it fully holds up. The Daniel Keene scene, specifically, didn't need to exist at all. The show could have left the tunnel-boring machines as unexplained background detail and lost absolutely nothing from the plot. Instead, it spent real screen time establishing that the man responsible for that piece of infrastructure did it by accident and then walked away entirely. That's not efficient exposition. That's a writer choosing to make a point. And once you see that scene as intentional, Gus and Jimmy's mother start reading less like coincidence and more like the same idea, repeated deliberately at opposite ends of the timeline. Looking ahead to the final 2 episodes, this season has now set up 2 enormous open questions. First, whether that 51 versus 50 silo discrepancy actually pays off, or whether it quietly disappears the way some earlier mysteries have. Second, and more importantly, whether the safeguard hidden beneath the silos ever gets an explanation anyone can accept. Juliet's stance on this is unusually restrained for a protagonist in this kind of story. She isn't claiming there's no possible justification for what's been done. She's simply refusing to listen to one while the weapon capable of killing an entire population is still active and pointed at her people. Cap the pipe first. Talk after. That's a genuinely rare position for a lead character to take, and it tells you the finale is likely building toward a moment where the other side finally gets to make its case, with the audience already having watched every person who built that case fail to understand what they were actually building. So that's Grey Goo, broken all the way down. A billionaire's fear of cheap technology, a 51 silo discrepancy that hasn't been resolved, and three separate people across two timelines who changed the entire outcome of this story without ever knowing they'd done it. 2 episodes left. If you've got a theory on where the 51st silo fits, or what justification could possibly make the safeguard defensible, drop it below. I read all of them, and the strongest ones shape where the next breakdown goes. If this kind of deep dive is your thing, subscribe because there's a new one going up every week until the finale.